I tell you, I'm no big fan of the Bible. I don't find the stories all that interesting. What I find most interesting about the X-rated Bible aren't the stories themselves, the incest, the murders, all that stuff, but the way the Bible is now read by someone who might go, really? Is this really part of the Bible? Just seeing it from a different point of view, a different angle than from these healers and whatnot you have screaming on the TBN network. My name's Adam Parfrey. The company is called Feral House, as in feral children, feral cats, things undomesticated and not civilized in the way that the norms will have it. And
but not ferocious.
Not ferocious necessarily, but anyway, it's been in business since 1989, and in Los Angeles and Portland, and back to Los Angeles. I think I first came into contact with the X-rated Bible personally back in the late 80s, but I heard about it, I believe, even before that. When did it first?
85. It was published in 85.
Just when it was published, I believe. It had a lot of notoriety in some write-ups, and I didn't even see a copy, but I kept hearing about it, and it was difficult to find, I believe, because the Atheist Foundation didn't have distribution like a Random House book would, you know, to all the bookstores in America. But anyhow, I kept hearing about this strange, objectionable book called the X-rated Bible that took all the dirty parts of the Bible and played them up. This is what I heard about the book. Anyway, I was very happy to find the book in Brand Bookstore in Glendale in the very late 80s, early 90s, and read it myself, and I found it fascinating. The way the Bible could be approached by somebody who is not reading it all as the voice of God, and in a manner that is actually quite literal and not objectionable at all, but using the rationalist human mind to go over this old piece of writing by a number of different individuals. Anyhow, that was my interest in the X-rated Bible. I've had this book on my shelf for 8-9 years, and I finally thought that it was finally time to see this book in bookstores. It was very difficult to find in bookstores, and my company has distribution to the chain bookstores and independent bookstores across America, and be able to do a nice job with the cover and so on. I just wanted to see this book out in a wider basis. I just think that title really grabs people, makes people think about the Bible, and that can't be bad. When you see TBN and all these Christian networks and all that stuff, people aren't thinking. There's just a lot of praising, and, you know, there's no real human thought or effort to understand the religious aspect of the Bible, the supposed Word of God. And that's what Ben Akerley did. Strangely enough, when I was researching who owned the rights to this book and was emailing the Atheist Society, the post-Madeline Murray O'Hare Atheist Foundation, I then heard that Ben Akerley lived just about a block away from the office, the Feral House office. Wow, we were meant to be.
Basically, it goes back to being age 13 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and sitting on a streetcar because I had a long commute to school every day, and reading through the Bible. And I came upon the passage in Leviticus, mankind shall not lie with mankind as with womankind, it is abomination, they shall surely be put to death. And I think I turned every color of the rainbow, because even at age 13, I was already an active gay male, And all of a sudden, I was devastated and traumatized that this book I had been taught to look to as the only infallible moral guide for all humankind was telling me that my sexual orientation was sinful and perverted and wrong, and it was absolutely difficult to deal with. Today, 1/3 of teenage suicides are gay kids, even though gay kids only represent 10% of the teenage population. So, with that knowledge, if my X-rated Bible can spare just one gay teenager from going through all the trauma and the self-doubt and the hatred that I went through, it will have been well worth the effort. But fast forwarding now from that age 13 to my position on the faculty at USC in the early 70s, the Gay Liberation Group at USC wanted to be able to function as a regular campus group, meaning that they had access to the student union building and all the other privileges that any student group on the campus would have. For the first time in the history of the University of Southern California, the trustees went into a secret ballot because they were all terrified what anybody would think if they looked like they were supporting gay rights or encouraging homosexuality. And we as a group, the Gay Liberation Group, had to finally threaten to sue them because they voted not to give us our status, our campus status. And one of the Campus Crusade for Christ members wrote to the Daily Trojan newspaper, "Trustees, please do not allow the Gay Liberation Front campus recognition because this would be encouraging homosexuality, which is condemned in the Bible." So I wrote a very brief article, Sex in the Bible, in which I pointed out that if you're going to go by what the Bible condemns, then fornication is also a capital offense. You should not live in sin. If you're not married, sex without benefit of the church, bestiality, adultery, loss of virginity, all of these are capital offenses. And to single out homosexuality as if it were the only capital offense and the worst crime in the Bible and sin was tunnel vision. And I said in the end of my brief article, because they said in their Campus Crusade they were trying to Christianize the United States, the whole country, by the 1980s, I said, why don't you concentrate on humanizing your local campus group? And it was after that that I became involved with Madalyn Murray O'Hair and brought her to the campus to speak, that I decided to expand that single article, Sex in the Bible, with just a few examples, into my anthology, which is not exhaustive, but it's very comprehensive with 60 chapters and covers just about every facet of sex in the Bible. And of course, Madalyn Murray O'Hair agreed to publish it, and it came out under the imprint, then imprimatur, of the American Atheist Press in 1985. One thing that all fundamentalists insist on is there's no such thing as situation ethics. They accuse humanists and atheists and freethinkers of practicing situation ethics, meaning that you determine whether something is good or bad or right or wrong according to the situation. They say the Bible doesn't allow that. And a perfect example is Phyllis Schlafly, who of course heads the Eagle Forum. She was on television one day and she said, God's plan is so simple. One man, one woman, one lifetime. And that's her solution to getting married and living happily forever after, like a fairy's tale. So going back to Lot and his daughters, we have two angel emissaries who have come to the city of Sodom to warn Lot that the city is about to be destroyed, and by the way, to be destroyed for general immorality, not just for gay sex, which all the fundamentalists want us to think this was a reason that Jehovah destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah was only because they engaged in specifically anal intercourse. The destruction of the city was already foreordained, and in the New Testament, one of the writers, Jude, mentions that Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed for general immorality. So when the angel emissaries came there, of course, if they were angel emissaries, they must have been very hunky-looking young dudes. The gay men of Sodom saw them going into Lot's home and knew that they would be his guests, so they came banging on the door and demanded that Lot allow the two men to come outside so that they could know them. Now again, know them is the word in Hebrew meaning have intercourse with them, not to get acquainted and shake hands. They wanted sex, and nothing but sex. So Lot offered his two daughters and said, here are my two virgin daughters who have never known man. Again, the use of the word known meaning never had intercourse with man. Take them and do with them what ye wish, but do not harm these men who not only are my guests, but were sent by Jehovah as special emissaries. But the men were not placated. They still preferred to have the men as sex partners, and then they were struck with blindness, and of course Lot and his clan escaped from Sodom, and the city was destroyed, and the angel messengers went back to their heavenly Father. What is so interesting is, if you could ever think of an example of situation ethics, here it is, where Lot offers his daughters instead of the men, because he feels that it would be less offensive to have his virgin daughters lose their virginity than it would be to have these angel messengers be raped. And I think that's an ideal, perfect, par excellence example of situation ethics. But again, of course, fundamentalists would not agree with me on that. So I put in my book that apparently it was more important to Lot to spare his house guest's rear end than it was his own daughter's front end. Now, it's true that you can rationalize and interpret all those verses as not being against sin, but being against procreation. You have to remember that Israel was a very tiny nation surrounded by many stronger and more powerful nations, and it was extremely important for Israel to produce as many soldiers as possible, male babies as possible. That's why when a woman gave birth, she was only contaminated for 40 days if she produced a male baby, but she was contaminated for 80 days if she produced a female baby. The whole thrust of sex was to produce, reproduce, be fruitful and multiply. So it's perfectly possible to rationalize all those biblical statements and say the only reason Jehovah was unhappy and the only reason Paul spoke out in the New Testament is because the sexual force was being directed toward pleasure, what today we call recreational sex, as opposed to procreation, which, according to the Bible, had to be the only legitimate means of having sex. And then you can rationalize anything on that basis. But they, amazingly, the gays who stay religious still need somehow to have the feeling that there's a big daddy in the sky watching over them, counting every hair on their head, and that they are important in the overall scheme of things, unlike Clarence Darrow, who said, as far as the big picture is concerned, we are a speck on a speck. That's how significant human life is. And Stephen Jay Gould, who says that it's cosmic arrogance to think that we, who represent the last few minutes of a year, to take the age of the earth as opposed to how long human life has been in existence, to think that we in these last few minutes of the year are as important or more important than the earth itself, which has been around for billions of years. So it's a way, Stephen Jay Gould says, of, since we are the only species that knows we're going to die, the only species aware of our mortality, religion then becomes a coping mechanism. And that's true whether someone's gay or straight or whatever, that it's a coping mechanism to try to justify and rationalize the fact that we are going to die, we are mortal, and this is all that we can be sure of, but there might be and should be a place to go afterwards that would be eternal bliss.
Well, the millennium, of course, is the calling card for extreme religion coming down upon us. I put out a book called Apocalypse Culture back in '87. I have a new edition coming out next year through St. Martin's Press, a New York publisher, and did a book called Cult Rapture, writings and some religious people involved with that. There we go. There's Mr. Koresh on the cover there. Anyway, you have a situation with the millennium, and I'm in the news groups and the internet, alt.apocalypse, alt.end times, or what have you, and so many people are ringing the bells and very happy that the world is going to end. Strangely enough, in Apocalypse Culture, this article was in it about the Christian right and Zionism, that actually people even like Ronald Reagan was with the belief that the Third World War would start with in the Middle East, in the grounds of Armageddon, with the help of Islam battling against the Jews, and the Jews are trying to tear away the temple of, or create the Temple of Solomon, but this second holiest site in Islam, Dome of the Rock's right there. So that will create a war, perhaps. And another way to create the Third World War and create the end of the world, and possibly it would, was to create this biological thing like this, the red heifer, the red cow that would be slaughtered in order to bring back the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, and the Temple of Solomon, all this weird notions, and people believe in this so much, they're almost trying to create the end of the world.
Make it a self-fulfilling prophecy.
A self-fulfilling prophecy, precisely. So it is something to really be fearful of, the insanity of this belief system, and to look into it and to really understand the possible problems of creating this.
And
idea.
there were people in 1844, when it was predicted the world would end, who, when the prophecy didn't come true, committed suicide because they were so sure that that had to be the end of time.
Yeah.
And then we have Stephen Jay Gould writing a book called Questioning the Millennium, where he points out that it is simply an arbitrary date, and that all this...
Well, it's 2001 rather than 2000.
Well, yes, but either way, that it's just an arbitrary way we have of measuring, and to impute anything more than that to it is absolute superstition and ridiculous exercise in futility. It doesn't mean anything more than a way of blocking time and labeling. That's all. It has no more significance than that.
Especially coming out, I intend to publish X-Rated Bible, Spring '99, and that millennial notch, that weird number coming up, the world is ending, and all these crazy atheists are putting out these blasphemous books against the Bible. No, it's not to create trouble on putting this out, but to cause thought. It caused thought for me just to even hear the title a long time ago. And that's, you know, I think that a nice edition, very well distributed, will possibly get people thinking about the Bible in a way it isn't generally thought about. That's the point.
Especially since it's the religious right that insists that the Bible is the only moral guide that we need, and that it's an infallible moral guide. And of course my objective is to point out that that's absurd. That if the morality in the Bible is the only morality, everybody's in trouble.